Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and iOS 26.2 released to the public about a month or so ago, and iOS 26.3 Beta 1 has been out for a few weeks as well, along with iOS 26.3a and iOS 26.3b just a couple days ago. But there's even more to talk about since the iOS 26.3a is out What's New video. We'll talk about the latest Apple news, we'll also talk about some features, and we'll talk about the overall experience. Not just my experience, but your experience based off the YouTube community poll on the post page, where at the time of this video there's over 16,000 votes and 216 comments. I've gone over all the comments to determine what the update is like for most people, so be sure to stick around toward the end of the video where I'll read some of your comments as well. Now, Apple's next yearly shareholder meeting is on February 24th, 2026. This is according to SEC filings noticed by Mac Rumors. It seems that we'll have that shareholder meeting, and maybe after that we'll have some new products a few weeks later, or possibly some new updates. That's typically how things go in the new year, but we'll have to wait and see. While a lot of people like the new liquid glass design, it seems just as many seem to not like it as well. Many people don't like the new reflections, refractions, and difficulty reading some text under certain conditions. Based on data from StatCounter noticed by Cult of Mac, found that as of January 2026, only 15 to 16% of active iPhones in the world are on iOS 26 or any iOS 26 update. StatCounter also found that based on their information, 60% of devices are running iOS 18 versions. This is in very stark contrast to previous versions in previous years. Typical adoption rate is much higher at this point after the public release. Normally about 4 months into the most recent release of iOS, they're around 60% adoption rate on all active phones. So iOS 18, like we have here as of last year, could have had a much higher adoption rate, and it seems we're just not seeing that this year. Mac Rumors also seems to back this up, showing slower adoption rate, stating that based off the first week of January last year, 89.3% of visitors were running some version of iOS 18. But this year, with iOS 26, it seems that only 25.7% of users visiting their site are using some version of iOS 26. This is not looking good for iOS 26 and liquid glass at this point. At this point, I believe Apple should allow devices that had some version of iOS 18 to downgrade it if they want to until they refine iOS 26 enough to make it much better. So maybe we'll see some major changes as that lead designer left a few weeks ago, and maybe we'll see that in the near future with some refinement where it looks just much better and more people adopt it. But we'll have to wait and see. Now, new emoji usually arrive in the .4 updates, so about iOS 26.4, while we expect a lot of different updates with iOS 26.4, Siri updates, and much more, we'll see new emoji as well, and there were some new ones recently announced by the Unicode Consortium. Those are the people responsible for the overall emoji ideas, and you can see these here. So this is what was recently submitted as possible emoji: face with squinting eyes, leftwards thumb sign, everything from a pickle to a lighthouse, a meteor, a racer, net with handle. And again, Apple does not come up with the emoji other than Genmoji that you create yourself. Rather, they just sort of comply with the Unicode standard along with those on Android as well as Microsoft. They all comply with this just to have a standardized emoji set. So that's something that we typically see every year. A lead designer of Safari has left Apple to join the browser company. Marco Treverio was one of the lead designers of Safari and is now gone, along with many other executives and leaders that have recently left. So this is something we're seeing more and more of, but we do see regular turnover at companies as well. So hopefully there's no change here, but we'll have to wait and see if there's any impact. Also, something pretty major that could happen this year is Tim Cook may retire or at least step back some of his responsibilities. Recently, it was noted that he wants to sort of slow down a little bit, and maybe that's to make way for a new CEO. There was recently an article on the New York Times, you can see here, where it says this could be Apple's next CEO. John Turnus has long thought to be maybe the possible successor to Tim Cook, so we could see that as soon as this year, maybe in that upcoming meeting or some other announcement. But we might see him as the next CEO, but we don't know that for sure. But either way, it looks like Apple is planning to transition away from Tim Cook. Whether that's this year or in a few years, it seems like there should be some transition happening based on recent events. Apple Card will now be under JP Morgan Chase instead of Goldman Sachs where it started. There's a new announcement on the Apple newsroom this past week where it says Chase to become new issuer of Apple Card. So many people have been asking me whether or not this means it will be available in more countries. We don't really know at this point, but maybe this opens it up to the world, and we'll have to wait and see what Apple does here. But maybe it will roll out to Canada and other places finally. When it comes to AirPods, Apple actually updated them this year. Apple has released updated AirPods Pro 3 in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Singapore with the Year of the Horse engraving. Apple does this regularly for the Year of updates, and this is something new available in those countries. So it basically has an emoji on here of Year of the Horse. So let me know if you've got your hands on those and what you think of the overall design. When it comes to new features this year, well, if you installed iPadOS 26.2 or macOS 26.2, you may be benefiting from upgraded Wi-Fi. This was recently found based off a document from Apple, but if you have an iPad or Mac that supports Wi-Fi 6E, then Apple has updated them with 160 MHz maximum channel bandwidth, and this was according to an updated document. However, some have noticed that the update was there prior to iOS 26.2, so it's unclear exactly when Apple added it, but it has been added to iPad and macOS. And again, on their website, you'll see it says Apple Platform Deployment. This is what was updated with the 160 Hz maximum channel bandwidth of support. So again, lots of different information here, but if you want to check it over, I'll link it in the description below. If you're someone that uses ChatGPT, it's been updated so that Apple Music can now be used as an extension and you can generate playlists with it. So let me know if you've used that, how it works for you. I don't really use it that much, so I'd love to hear how it's working for you. Also, if you use Spotify, you can now use the previously desktop-only friend listening activity feature. If the feature is enabled under privacy and social, friends can see your listening activity and you can see what your friends are listening to as well. But again, this is an opt-in only feature. Also, WhatsApp announced a few new features this week. You can see it on their website here where it says level up your WhatsApp group chats with new member tags, text stickers, and more. So it was on a blog post and should be available soon, or you may already have it. But again, member tags, text stickers, and event reminders. For example, it says now when you create and send an event in a group chat, you can set custom early reminders for your invitees. So those have been updated and should be available now, like I mentioned. Also, there was another update if you use Apple Research. If we go to the App Store, if you use the Apple Research app, it's been updated with Liquid Glass. So the latest version, 7.1.0, now has a Liquid Glass design where it wasn't updated until now. Now, when it comes to the iPhone 17 Pro seems to be selling very well. Many people are starting to really like the design, but the Fold seems to be the biggest thing people are waiting for that really want something a little bit different. iPhone Fold is in the works, and one big selling point is supposedly breakthroughs when it comes to the crease-free display. This past week at CES 2026, Samsung showed off a crease-free display, which could use similar tech to what Apple is doing to make the display seamless when it's open. So this might be a first look at the overall display, what it could entail, and how it could actually look when it's open and truly be crease-free. When it comes to updates this week, we're now in unknown territory with an unknown trajectory now that things have been changing within Apple and specifically within the iOS group. Designers have left, things have been changing, and maybe we're going to finally see some more stability. However, this past week we got some odd releases, background security improvements A and B. You can find those by going into your settings if you're on iOS 26.3 Beta 1, going all the way down to background security improvements, and you'll see the latest version is B. We had A earlier in the week, and then just the other day they released B. However, it does say the background security improvement is for testing purposes only and does not contain any security fixes. So there's nothing in it, they're just making sure it works, and you can even remove it and restart if you want. So if you want to get rid of it, you can. So typically it just shows up here. You can't be connected to a VPN, and then it should just show up in this area if you're on iOS 26.3 Beta 1. But you'll see that here, A or B, and it works on iPad as well. Now, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, Apple stopped signing iOS 26.1. Typically, a couple weeks after they do that, they push out another update because iOS 26.1 is currently not available to downgrade to. That leaves only iOS 26.2. So you can downgrade or restore iOS 26.2 or iOS 26.3 Beta 1 and nothing else. We could see an iOS 26.2.1 this coming week. I'm surprised we haven't seen anything already, but we could see it this coming week. Maybe we won't, and Apple will wait for iOS 26.3 Beta 2 and then the further updates with the public release. So I would expect at least iOS 26.3 Beta 2 this coming week, hopefully with some additional features and refinements that fixes the bugs we currently have, but also refines the overall experience, maybe changes a few things as well. But that's what we're waiting for. Maybe we'll have a public release at the end of January, early February, and then we're on to iOS 26.4, where we'll have that Siri update, maybe some new emoji, and some other things we don't expect. Of course, that will carry all the way until March, probably. We'll have that released. And then typically in June at WWDC 2026, we'll see iOS 27 for the first time with iOS 27 Beta 1. That's usually in the second week of June, of course, releasing to the public in September. So things are already moving along. Hopefully we'll see some beta updates this week, but that's what I'm expecting, at least for this coming week. Hopefully at least a beta update, maybe a public release, as we really need something to replace iOS 26.2 and all the bugs there. When it comes to the AirPods Pro 3 experience, I just wanted to mention briefly that I used them on the plane the entire way to CES and back. I'm on the East Coast. That's in Las Vegas, so about 4 to 5 hours away. No issues whatsoever, no issues with battery life. And while using them in the hotel and just editing with them, I've had no problems with them whatsoever. Some people have. I've really had no issues. Nothing with connectivity, nothing with device switching. They were really pretty solid this time around. So I don't think anything changed. Maybe I just have too many Bluetooth devices around at my home, but while I was traveling, they were great. Now, I'm not going to talk about the iOS 18.7.3 experience too much, other than to mention that it's great, but the main concern is users on iOS 18.7.3 are really concerned about security when the next update comes out. That's basically if Apple doesn't make it available on devices other than the iPhone XS, XS Max, and XR. That's typically what we see every single year, and that's what I would expect next time, where iOS 26.3 comes out, and that's all you have as an option to update. I really wish they would make iOS 18.7.4 available for those that would just like to stay on iOS 18, deal with that, and not have any bugs, and just have overall great performance and a good experience. But typically when iOS 18 came out, it was problematic. It got much better, and I think iOS 26 will as well. When it comes to the iOS 26.2 experience, well, we've talked about this quite a bit. I'm surprised there's not an update yet, but once there's an update, of course, it will fix some issues. Initially, it was much smoother than iOS 26.1, but the top complaints right now are display and ProMotion lag on older phones, such as the iPhone 16 Pro and older, as well as thermal and battery issues. However, I haven't really seen that myself. Keyboard lag is probably the number one concern. So within Notes, this is a note. On older devices, oftentimes this is very laggy, it's problematic, and many people are having issues with it. Also, it's mistyping what they've typed, even if they press the correct letter. So maybe pressing G, it automatically types F, even though you press the G key. So this is things we're seeing over and over, as well as RAM management, which is particularly bad on iOS 26.2. YouTube in particular is also buggy, but that's more of a YouTube issue. When it comes to Apple CarPlay, it still needs to be fixed. For example, while I was at CES and in an Uber in a Ford Mustang Mach-E, I saw CarPlay completely disconnect and the driver had to reconnect it manually. This was on the way to the airport, so this is an issue that's definitely still there. This was on the latest version and needs to be fixed. I thankfully haven't seen it too much in my car, but it seems to be very hit or miss depending on the type of car. Of course, there's the wallpaper bug still. So if we swipe down, you'll see it's nice and vibrant. Swipe up, and it desaturates a bit. Why they haven't fixed this since iOS 18 or earlier, I'm not sure. However, if you are having lag on older devices on iOS 26.2, specifically iPhone 12 and 13 models, maybe even 14, I would recommend turning off the overall reduced transparency, or turning that on to reduce transparency. It's under accessibility, display and text size, reduce transparency, and a lot of people say this fixes the lag immediately. So try that out if you're experiencing those issues. When it comes to the iOS 26.3 Beta 1 experience or iOS 26.3 experience, it's pretty stable overall with occasional random resprings. So sometimes I'll just go into Mail or maybe go into Notes and it resprings the device. I've seen that a few times, usually a couple times a week. It's not horrible, but it's definitely something that needs to be resolved. It has good performance overall. Control Center haptic has been fixed as far as the lag, and the app library stutter when going home and everything else seems to be great. As I've mentioned before, most of the time there's no real issues here. RAM management is fixed for most, thermal management has been improved, it's smoother, has improved battery life, we'll talk about in a moment, but the bugs that remain are definitely still there. For example, when I was at CES, I was trying to film with the camera here, and it was incredibly blue the first time I went into it. If I turn this around, sometimes it's just very blue-white balance. You have to switch lenses, go back, and then it resolves the issue. Definitely an issue that I had to deal with more than once. Also, people say when you're using the flash, it can freeze the camera up. There's also some call issues people are reporting. If you're on a phone call, your entire phone can lock up and become unresponsive, and then again, those system crashes. CarPlay, however, seems to work just fine, at least for me and quite a few others, but Maps has crashed a few times for people, and CarPlay doesn't connect sometimes right away. It may take a little bit longer. Again, the wallpaper bug does seem to be better, but it's still not perfect. It desaturates a bit. When it comes to performance, it's generally fast on the latest version, 26.3 Beta 1. However, the latest public version, again, has some lag, specifically on older devices, like I mentioned. Like I also said, many people have issues with heat and thermals. Now, I used the 17 Pro Max while I was at CES, and I had no issues with thermals whatsoever. It was about 60 to 65 degrees ambient temperature or 70 degrees in buildings, no real issues whatsoever, and 26.2 is where most people have issues, but I haven't seen a whole lot of that, at least from the devices I've seen. But let's go ahead and take a look at overall benchmarks and see how they heat up while we're testing that. So I did test these earlier, but let's take a look again. Let's go ahead and flip these over, take a look at thermals while it's running benchmarks, and then we'll take a look at benchmarks once they complete. If we take a look at iPhone 17 Pro Max running iOS 26.3 Beta 1, we're at about 34.3 degrees Celsius at the hottest point, maybe a little bit higher. And then on the iPhone Air running iOS 26.2, we're at about 39 degrees Celsius, and it does typically go around 40 degrees Celsius, so 39.5 now as it's raising temperature a little bit. But overall, right where we expect them. Benchmarks just completed, and on iOS 26.2, we have 3,605 for single-core, 9,542 for multi-core on the iPhone Air. On the 17 Pro Max with 26.3 Beta 1, 3,823 for single-core, 9,907 for multi-core. Again, this can vary, but it's well within the margin of error. I've seen it at 10,000, I've seen it a little bit lower, but overall, very good. When it comes to overall battery life, it's been pretty good, but let's first talk about iOS 26.2. Thanks to Abhishek for sending this in. This is on an iPhone 16e set to 100% charge limit with 100% battery health. You'll see he had 5 hours and 11 minutes of screen on time, 2 hours and 21 minutes of screen off time using 62% of the battery. Overall, pretty good compared to what you would expect for 26.2. However, based on what you had to say on the comments, 68% of you said that you report poor battery life or bad battery life. Only 32% said it's great though. On iOS 26.3 Beta 1, let's take a look at my battery life here. So we'll go back, take a look at battery and battery health. I'm at 100% capacity with 51 cycles. And if we take a look at overall battery life, and most of this will be when I was at CES, but if we take a look, a couple days ago, 4 hours and 4 minutes of screen active time, 4 hours and 2 minutes of screen idle time with 65% battery use. The day before, probably the busiest day at CES for me, 4 hours and 19 minutes with 3 hours and 28 minutes of screen idle time using 78% of the battery. I did have to charge multiple times just to make sure I had enough for different events, but overall, I think this is because of signal, not because of overall usability. The signal there, while I have probably 5 bars in many cases, sometimes I didn't have signal at all, on T-Mobile in Vegas at that time was pretty terrible. Even with full connectivity, I had 0 signal. I couldn't communicate, and there was lots of issues because of congestion. So definitely an issue there, and that probably used a lot more power than I would expect. So overall, I was getting about 5 hours of screen on time, where typically I would get a lot more than that. But you'll see 5 hours and 57 minutes using 96% on Sunday. Now, as far as what you had to say, 71% of those on 26.1 Beta 1 report good or great battery life, and again, only 29% say it's worse than 26.2, so pretty good overall. Now, when it comes to what you have to say about the overall experience, let's take a look at some of your comments. Matt Rayner 0611 said, on iOS 26.2, it's running pretty smoothly, good battery life, no micro stuttering. Only real bug I'm having is the missing wallpaper art bug on iPhone 16 Pro, looking forward to iOS 26.3. Tim R3255 said, iOS 26.2 on my iPhone 17 Pro works great. Battery life is excellent, no complaints for me. Michael Sear 3538 said, I'm on iOS 26.2 on iPhone 16 Pro and it runs cool and fast. Only issue I am running into with several app games is when they run ads, especially if you temporarily switch to another app for a moment. The ad freezes and I have to end the game to restart the game app. This started with the 26.2 release. Mid-Eats says the main bug is the camera bug. Turn on your flashlight manually and take a photo, your screen will hang and your photos will not be taken. I even reported it to Apple. My phone is a 17 Pro Max, iOS 26.3b. Harry Din A says, experiencing more lag in more places on iOS 26.2 on 11 Pro Max. The keyboard issue is still there and typing in notes is slow and laggy. Using camera app is still laggy even after wiping the device and setting up as brand new. Apple really needs to push out 26.2.1 fast. Sus Wars R8J said, still having random resprings on every version of 26 on my iPhone 17 Pro Max. Apple needs to do something about stability and bug fixes. Anthony Knight said, 13 Mini here was experiencing problems with 26.2, but reduced transparency and reduced motion took away all the showy crap, leaving everything else working fine. Supernova 86 said, after the update, 26.2 is like on 60 Hz all the time. 16 Pro Max, I wish I could take it back to 18.7. MN Cedising Kobo 4 said, 16 Pro Max still running iOS 18.7.2 like a dream. Battery health is sitting at 95%, the OS is stable, and everything is working as it should. If you're wondering if you should install iOS 26.3 betas, well, at this point, I would probably just wait for the next one or see if there's a public release like we talked about earlier. So just wait for that, see how it goes, and hopefully there'll be something new. When it comes to iOS 26.2, we're desperately waiting for an update. However, I would give it a C- at this point and call it the Jittery Glass. iOS 26.2 brought stabilization to iOS 26 and iOS 26.0.1, but it's still not up to the refinement or really what we expect of Apple. It stutters, lags, has some odd issues still, and while it has more polish than previous versions, it still feels heavy and sluggish, especially on last year's iPhones and older. The keyboard lag really needs to be acknowledged and addressed by Apple, along with the bug fixes and battery improvements, so hopefully we see that soon. iOS 26.3 Beta 1, again, hopefully we see a new update soon. I would give it a B+, and at this point, it's the Redemption Beta. Currently in beta with accompanying A and B security responses, this version is being hailed by the community as a major turning point for Apple. It seems to work better with adaptive power, for example, getting through the day longer, and overall just seems to be a much more refined version. It's fluid, more refined, like I mentioned, and definitely still needs work, but it's a step in the right direction. So hopefully we see Apple update this soon, where it's just that much better. And so that's everything with iOS 26.2 and iOS 26.3 Beta 1. Hopefully we have another big update this coming week with some more refinements and changes. Let me know your iOS experience in the comments below, and of course I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.